You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I'm Brooke McKenna, but today's case is The Man in the Attic, the unbelievable case of Walburga Oesterreich. Now, this case made me speechless, but the LA Times kind of summed it up perfectly in one of their statements, and they said, her eyes and her appetites would bring a long line of men into her life, and send one to his death. By the way, I am posting crazy, odd, strange type cases for October, and if you are interested, make sure you are subscribed with the post notification bell on so you never miss when I post, because there are so many more videos coming this month. Now let's get back to the story. So it was 1922 in California, and the Oesterreich family lived in Los Angeles. This family consisted of Walburga, who went by Dolly, and that's what I'll refer to her as from now on, and her husband Fred. Dolly was the housewife while her husband went out and worked in their own factory. They owned very many businesses, and one of which was a very successful apron factory. Going back in time, they didn't always live in Los Angeles. When Dolly was growing up, she actually lived in the Midwest to a farm owner, and they really weren't a very wealthy family at all. They didn't have much money, and so at about 14, Dolly had to go and begin work at a factory herself, and this is where she met Fred, who was 17 at the time. They had an instant connection, and 3 years later they were getting married, and they moved to Milwaukee to start their own businesses. And when they officially started the apron business, that is when they grew into their wealth. But as anyone with money will tell you, that is the last thing that will make you happy. Dolly was extremely unsatisfied. Fred would drink all the time, and it was said that he was never good in bed, even when he was sober. And Dolly was very unhappy with her life and her marriage, and finally in 1913, when it said she was about 33 years old, she called Fred and she asked him to send over a repairman because she was trying to do some work on the sewing machine and it wasn't working. And so Fred sent over someone who worked at their factory, who was 17-year-old repairman Otto Sanhuber. This was just who Dolly was expecting, and when Otto went up to the door and knocked, he was greeted with a half-naked Dolly. All she was wearing was stockings and a silk robe, and that is when the affair began. At first, it was at different hotels. They would go and sneak around, except for this cost a lot of money, and it would also be money that Fred would notice going missing. So then they began to just go to Dolly's house, where it was also Fred's house, while Fred was at work, and have the affair behind his back there, except for the neighbors were quite nosy and began to notice that this was happening and that Otto was coming around an awful lot. The only excuse that Dolly had was that Otto was her vagabond half-brother, but no one believed this, and eventually they would tell Fred. But now Dolly was in a pickle. She couldn't continue to have Otto over and have Fred saying things and know about this affair, but she also couldn't go anywhere and spend any more money on him. So she came up with this idea that no human in their right mind would agree to. But Otto did. Dolly told Otto that he should quit his job and live in her attic, right above where her husband slept. She said that that way, when Fred was at work and Dolly was home because she was the housewife, that Otto could come down and they could basically get busy all day long. The Let's Go to Court podcast actually said that she bought him a bed and a little table and put him upstairs in the attic. She also rented him books from the library every week and allowed him to eat the food that they would go grocery shopping for. And Otto said yes to all of this because it was the perfect place for him. He had always wanted to be a writer of pulp fiction, and he couldn't really do so with a full-time job. So he thought this was the perfect arrangement, and Dolly was the love of his life anyway. He didn't have any other family members that would miss him, so he didn't see why not. The LA Times said, "At night he read mysteries by candlelight and wrote stories of adventure and lust. By day he made love to Dolly, helped her keep house, and made bathtub gin." By 1917, 5 years had gone by with Otto living this new life of confinement in the attic. However, suddenly Fred wanted to move. He said that he wanted to move to LA, but most importantly, he wanted to get out of that house because it was making him crazy. He began to believe there was some sort of ghost or paranormal happenings in that house, and that all of his cigars would go missing, that he would hear noises all through the night, and that half the groceries were being eaten at a very quick rate, much quicker than it had been before with just the two of them in the home. He didn't know what was happening, and he would tell Dolly this, and she didn't hear anything. She didn't know what he was talking about, and she even said, "Fred, maybe you should go to the doctor." And so Fred did, and oh so surprisingly, the doctor couldn't find anything wrong with him. The next year, Fred demanded that they leave Milwaukee, and they were going to go to Los Angeles. They went and they searched for homes. They found one that overlooked Sunset Boulevard, and they went back home to pack everything. However, at this point, Otto was already moving into their new house, and the brand new attic that Dolly had requested that was in their home. Los Angeles homes don't always have an attic, but Dolly said that that was a must for this new house. And so Otto had already moved in before Dolly and Fred ever could. After a few months of living in this new home in Los Angeles, Fred got even more paranoid and frustrated because everything that was happening in the previous house was continuing to happen there. He just couldn't escape it, and he had no idea why nobody else could see or hear any of the things that he was experiencing. He was then taking his frustrations out on Dolly and would often get in fights with her, but Otto was living his best life. He was upstairs writing many different novels, and many were being published under a pen name that was giving him some money to give back to Dolly. By 1922, Dolly and Fred's fights were constant, and on August 22nd, it was their worst fight yet. And Otto, in the attic, hearing all of this, couldn't take it anymore and wanted to protect the love of his life. So he climbed down the small hole in the closet, got into the closet, and went into Dolly and Fred's bedroom, where he saw Fred's two .25 caliber pistols. He picked them up and he headed out to confront Fred. With one glance, Fred immediately knew why Otto was there, what was happening, and why he had felt crazy for so many years. Because of course, Otto had been Fred's employee when he mysteriously quit and vanished. Fred and Otto struggled for a little while when one shot rang out and hit the ceiling. The next three would hit Fred square in the chest, killing him instantly. Otto immediately locked Dolly into a closet and threw the keys on the floor. The police were called due to Dolly's screaming in the house, and the neighbors had heard this and wanted to make sure everything was okay after hearing gunshots and Dolly screaming. So they sent the police over, and they found Dolly locked in this closet. When they arrived, they found Fred deceased on the floor with Dolly still screaming in the closet, and when they got her out, they asked her what had happened, and she had said that they had arrived home, that she had gone upstairs, and Fred had come face to face with a burglar, and he had been shot by this burglar, who then took his expensive watch and shoved her in the closet before locking her in there. She said that she had passed out, and when she had come to, she began to scream, and then she passed out once more before the cops came. Police thought that this story was very suspicious, but what were they to do when Dolly couldn't have locked herself in the closet, and they had no idea that her own lover was then back in the attic holding Fred's stolen watch. Police asked the obvious questions of Dolly. Did you and your husband fight? And she said, "Oh no, never. We never once fought in our entire marriage," which is strange in itself. What married couple never fights? But even though the police were growing more and more suspicious of her, they still had zero evidence, and it seemed almost like an unbelievable murder. But Dolly now had their full fortune, and she was going to buy a new house. The one request was that it had an attic. But why? Her husband was now dead, and Otto could have come out. There was no need hiding him from anybody. Except for it appeared she liked to do so, or maybe Otto liked to live there because, once again, he was moved into her attic. And Dolly was about to get herself a new man because her estate attorney was a handsome man named Herman S. Shapiro, and she was instantly infatuated with him. They spent so much time together, but after a while he began to work so many hours that Dolly didn't get enough attention, and that's when she had Otto. But she was so obsessed with Herman that she wanted to give him a gift, one fit for a king, a diamond watch. And she obviously didn't think this through, because as soon as Herman saw it, he said, "Wasn't this the watch that the robbers stole from your husband?" And Dolly had to think fast, saying that she had found it after the cops had already left. He seemed to believe this and wore the watch all the time. However, Dolly wasn't satisfied even then. She wanted more men in her life. And that is when she began to go in contact with an aspiring actor and businessman named Roy Klum. Except for I'm not sure she really wanted him for any sexual endeavors. It was more for another reason. A cover-up. She had given him one of the .25 caliber pistols and said, "Look, I have this pistol in my home. I know it's the same one used on my husband. I don't want the police to think that I did it, so will you get rid of it for me?" And Roy did. He took it to the La Brea tar pits and tossed it in. However, Dolly still had one more gun to get rid of, and she went to her neighbor and said the same thing, and her neighbor said, "Sure, I'll bury it in my backyard." So he did so. But this would be Dolly's biggest mistake, because now two people had evidence connecting her to her ex-husband's murder. Now, Dolly broke up with this aspiring actor Roy about a year later, and he was so angered by this that he went to the police and told them what he had done with this gun. And they went to this tar pit and allegedly found it a year later and brought Dolly in. If that wasn't enough to hold her, another gun was about to be brought in by the neighbor who heard all of this happening and dug it up, saying, "I don't want to be a part of this. Dolly made me bury her other gun." Now, Dolly was being locked up, and she had a huge problem because there was a man in her attic that relied on her for food. So when her other lover and also attorney, Herman, came to see her one day, she said, "Look, I need you to go to my home and drop off some groceries, go into the closet, and tap on it." And of course, Herman wanted to know why, and she had to explain that her vagabond half-brother was living in her attic and needed food. Herman did as he was told. However, when he whistled for this half-brother to come down, Otto did and began to tell Herman about all of the sex that he was having with Dolly. Herman was furious and demanded that Otto leave and never return again. And he did. Dolly was eventually released on bail because those guns were so corroded after so many years that they basically couldn't test it against her at all. And this is when Herman moved in with Dolly for about 7 years. However, in 1930, Dolly would be caught cheating on him, and Herman would go to the police with all of the information he had, including about Otto, which would clear up how Dolly locked herself in the closet. Dolly was arrested again, and Otto was found a year later living in LA once again and arrested at that point as well. Before then, he had moved to Canada, and he had actually gotten married and was living under the new name Walter Klein. However, when they arrested him, he would confess to everything, even saying that he had willingly lived in an attic for 10 years. And the press went crazy with this, calling him Batman, which was this was before the superhero, and saying that he was Batman because he lived in this secluded cave-like attic for so many years. His defense really used this in the trial, saying that Dolly had enslaved him for all of those years, that he had the mind of an 8-year-old young boy, and that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. I mean, Otto even said at that point that his confession was all based on what Herman wanted him to say to keep Dolly from going to jail. Otto was then found guilty of manslaughter. However, they didn't look into the entire case very well because it was then found that the statute of limitations had expired for Fred's murder. So he was released. There was also a theory that Dolly's lover Roy was the actual murderer, and that's why he got rid of the weapon himself. He just didn't do it well enough, but not many people believe this one. Next was Dolly's trial that ended in hung jury and was acquitted, and by 1936, all of the charges against her were dropped. She stayed in LA and remarried again, and Otto actually left LA and seemingly disappeared. But Dolly, we know, died in 1961 at 80 years old, and no one was ever officially charged in Fred's murder. I was requested this by one of you guys. You know who it is. I love seeing your comments, and I was really intrigued by this entire case. I thought it was literally the perfect case to do for ODDtober, and I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I really felt that I got into telling Walburga or Dolly's story, and I don't know, it was just one of the most fun ones to research, even though it was still about a murder. But I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope you're enjoying ODDtober too, because I am really happy that you guys continue to come back and watch these videos. It makes me so happy. So don't ever forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay, bye.